When we purchased the cottage and the lands and whatnot, the main cottage obviously has a full bathroom, but the bunkie had nothing. It was quite literally a bare bones bunkie. Because we don't come up here all the time during the summer, we're both still working, we look to rent the property out during the summer. So we wanted a solution where if there was a bigger group or a bigger family or people wanted to spread out a little bit more, and having a second bathroom is never that bad an idea. And one of the challenges up here is the terrain is very rocky. There can be issues with permitting when you're adding in stuff that goes to a septic, and we're also on a septic. So as we started exploring a traditional flush toilet, it ended up being a lot more involved than we had thought. And we aren't cottage people, we're city people. So we were learning a lot of this as we went. As we started to look at the math of what was involved with getting the permit, the delays that could happen with that, the trenching that would be involved to get it back into the septic, the pumps that would be needed, the cost really started getting out of control. So we found the incinerator toilet on, I believe we found it in a cottage magazine at first, and there was a trade show down in Toronto where we're from. So we went to the trade show, checked it out, and it seemed like it was going to be a good solution. It was, we need a toilet in the bunkie. What are our options? So we did look at composting toilets. The challenge with a composting toilet, and as I mentioned before, we rent the property out. So while there's nothing wrong with composting, we compost at home, there's a difference between composting your banana peels and composting your waste. So the incinerator toilet, which turns everything to ash, seemed like a much cleaner, easier solution that, quite frankly, was a little bit less risky for renters to mess up. Because, you know, renters aren't cottage people. They're people that rent a cottage for one weekend or a couple weekends a year. They don't know how all this stuff works. So you don't want stuff to be overly complicated. You want it to be pretty simple. And putting a filter in, doing your business, and then just hitting the incinerator and dealing with the ash weekly or however often it's used is a pretty easy way to do it. Might sound odd, but if you can make drip coffee, you can use an incinerator toilet. No, there's no smell at all outside of like immediate after regular human bathroom smells. I think what you would have to look at is the cost is obviously a factor. Everybody has different budgets. You know, on the tier of costing, you know, maybe a compost toilet is definitely a lower cost alternative, but there's a certain maintenance factor with that. If you're in a place where you can't get electrical, for example, then maybe a compost toilet makes a lot of sense. How much work do you want to do at it? Do you want to be composting human waste? Have you got a place to do that? Have you got a compost pile? Do you want that compost pile around? If you don't want to have to deal with that and you just want something that's real simple, disposing of a bowl full of ash, much like you would for your fireplace or your fire pit or anything like that, is extremely easy. If you have a cottage, if you have a fireplace, you're used to doing this anyway. You have an ash bucket, you have an ash disposal system. It's just an extension of that. I think we were a little surprised at how non-weird it was. I think we expected it to be more different, and it's really not. So there's different heights of toilets. You have your standard height, and there's a comfort height, etc. So this is higher than the standard height. So it's more of a comfort height toilet to give the accommodation for the ash bucket. As someone that is older and not as flexible and has replaced one hip so far, I find the higher toilet seat to be better than a lower traditional toilet seat. The overall experience itself is very comparable. You know, it is a cottage, it is a bunkie, it's not overly heated. So there is that moment of awareness when you first sit down, but that has nothing to do with the toilet. That's just more of the ambient temperature. But you're gonna get that anywhere else.